I want to thank Dr. Patrizio Fileri and the Italian Archeological School for their kind invitation. It is an honor for me to come here and present the newest documents on the accounts of the Egyptian gods concerning the island of Rhodes. And because I have been already delayed by the heavy traffic out there, I will start immediately. Rhodes, situated at the crossroad of the important trade routes of antiquity, has served as a meeting point for people and cultures ever since prehistoric times. In geometric and archaic periods, when Cypriots and Phoenicians were dominating the field, a significant number of important artifacts appeared on the island, attesting to the close commercial ties that Rhodes maintained with the civilizations of the southeastern Mediterranean basin. The so-called Egyptian gap, a distinct group of objects among these artifacts, recovered mostly from the unbodied deposits of the famous sanctuaries of Atene in the three thriving city-states of the island, include faience pendants and small figurines depicting Egyptian deities and demons, along with scarabs bearing inscriptions with their names or images, testifying that Rhodes had already in this early period been acquainted with the gods of Egypt. The familiarization of the Rhodians with representative members of the Egyptian pantheon and their gradual simulation of Greek gods, according to Herodotus' testimony, undoubtedly paved the way for the adoption of their cult in the succeeding years. Rhodes placed itself among the pioneers of incorporating the cults of Isis and Serapis in its state-authorized system. The island's role as an international port must have enabled the diffusion of their cult in the Aegean area and the Greek mainland, perhaps even before the establishment of the first sanctuary of Serapis in Delos. Before the unearthing of the Herodian Museum, the presence of the Egyptian gods on the island was primarily documented by artifacts bearing their images and inscriptions associated with their cults. The existence of a sanctuary dedicated to Isis was attested only by the literary sources of the Roman period. Numerous finds from Rhodes representing Isis, Serapis, Hippocrates, and other Egyptian deities are indicative of their recognizability by the locals. Moreover, the consolidation of the Asiatic cults in Rhodes can be reflected in its coinage, which adopts from 205 BC and on several Asiatic iconographic symbols on the reverse. For example, the basilion, the typical headdress of Isis consisting of a solar disk between two feathers. This act was soon imitated by other Aegean or Asian minor city-states such as Chios, Mindos, and Stratonikia. These cities followed the example of Rhodes and included the Asiatic diadem in their vintage. The image of Serapis with a Thalamus headpiece also appears in the Rhodian coinage of the 2nd century AD on the reverse of a bronze coin. The god's figure can be recognized in Rhodian statuary as well. 4 headless marble statuettes and the body relief present Serapis in the same iconographic type, seated on a throne, wearing a heavy mantle draped over his legs, left and left arm. Even though the new torso of an enthroned paternal deity usually pertains to Zeus, images of Serapis without a chiton do exist, and the strong similarity of these statuettes to the statue of the god found at the Serapeon Bion Delos argues for ascribing to the Rhodian specimen the identity of Serapis. The group of known representations of the god is supplemented by a marble bearded head crowned by a thalatos and the head of a terracotta figurine larger in size than usual. Both works of art are dated in the Hellenistic period, while later, in Roman times, images of the god often appear as a decoration theme on objects of everyday use or jewelry. Besides Serapis, Rhodian statuary can exhibit at least 5 representations of Isis, standing in a frontal pose and wearing a kippa covered by a mantle, fastened upon her breast with a characteristic Isaac knot. Additionally, 2 small pieces of blue glass with double-sided relief decoration, either pendants or headpins, almost certainly bear the image of Isis. They present the frontal bust of a Fileri goddess with long hair framing her face. Glass pendants with similar depictions dated from 330 BC until the end of the 3rd century BC have been found at several sites of the Mediterranean. Although many researchers identify the depicted deity with the Punic goddess body, the existence of the Isaac knot on specimen from Kalinos support the identification of the female bust with Isis. Isis, in the form of a serpent crowned by the basilion, is carved on a remarkable feast of ostroglyph, a bone handle recovered in the necropolis of Rhodes. Its decoration wisely combines images of Harpocrates and his mother in scenes directly related to wealth and fertility. In this case, Isis adopts the appearance of Antichità, the Egyptian snake goddess of nature and fertility, whose cult was widely spread in the region of Fayum. The assimilation of Isis with Antichità is expressed by the image of Isis Thermuthis, which gradually becomes Hellenized with the snake goddess depicted with the body of a snake and the human bust or head, often in the combined Serapis Anatolella. The main side of the handle pictures Harpocrates seated on a swan holding the cornucopia, the symbol of wealth and fertility, in his left arm. To the left of the scene, Horus himself probably stood in the form of a falcon on top of a rectangular pillar. Although the Egyptian alter ego of Harpocrates is not actually preserved, its existence can be inferred by the almost identical scenes that survive in 2 similar bone handles, the first one found in Oxyrhynchus and the second one in Paphos. Apart from the appearance of Isis on this exceptional artifact of the early Roman period, Harpocrates becomes a popular decorative theme on Roman lamps found in bronze in the years to come. 1 lamp and 4 lampstands of medium production are characteristic examples of this trend. The images of Harpocrates on the lampstands follow the usual iconographic type of the god, which appears for the first time in the 2nd century BC in Alexandria and keeps being reproduced in art ever since until late antiquity, following his increasing popularity. The god is presented standing in a contrapposto pose, leaning on a pillar, holding a cornucopia in his left arm. One of the lampstands presents a varied iconography of the god, is rendered in a frontal pose beside a palm branch, an attribute of Anubis in his Hellenized form. On the vertical acanthus handle of a large lamp, the infant god is depicted seated in his lap full of fruits, an equivalent representation of cornucopia, which functions as an appeal for good fortune and an abundance of goods. Here are the depictions of Harpocrates from Hellenistic Rhodes, among them a small statuette of basalt and a terracotta figurine, as well as a glass amulet in the form of the child god's bust, dated to the 2nd to 1st century BC. This amulet shares a strong similarity with the pendant from Israel, considered a product of the famous glass workshops of Alexandria. Anubis, one of the most ancient gods of the Egyptian pantheon, was present in the Aegean already from the Hellenistic period, and was often venerated along with the Syrian family, Isis, Serapis, and Harpocrates. Mentions of the Canine head god of the underworld are totally absent in Rhodian inscriptions. The lack of written testimonies is counterbalanced by the existence of a relief plaque of white marble bearing the image of the god in his pure Egyptian form. The relief is incomplete on its left and right sides and seems to have been part of a larger composition which may have included more Egyptian deities. The interest and the peculiarity of this work lies in the fact that it stylistically follows the conventional rules of Egyptian sculpture, presenting analogies according to an iconographic type developed in the early New Kingdom and could have easily been mistaken for an imported Egyptian work had it not been made of white marble, an unusual choice of material in Egyptian art. Besides the images of Isis, Saracs, and Harpocrates, which are encountered in significant numbers in the archaeological material of Rhodes, as well as the unique appearance of Anubis on the marble relief, two more deities, very popular among the Egyptians, have also a distinct presence on the island. The demonic figures of Bes and Taweret, protectors of family, motherhood, and childhood against any kind of threat, have been recognized in works of sculpture and minor art, while objects connected with Isiac ritual practice, such as this small horn altar of limestone, have also been recovered. The Rhodian archaeological material related to the Egyptian gods is supplemented by the surviving inscriptions of the island, invaluable witnesses of the existence and practicing of the Egyptian cults by the inhabitants of the ancient city. Gothic inscriptions, as well as ethnographic records of private Celtic associations active all over the island during the Hellenistic and Roman period, or lists of the priests of the Rhodian official cults found in Lindos, Tavios, and Rhodes, remain irreplaceable documents for information on priests and worshippers of the Egyptian gods. Inscriptions bearing dedications to the Egyptian deities may not form a large group, but are enlightening as to the venerated members of the Egyptian pantheon. Isis, Serapis, and Osiris, Serapis' Egyptian counterpart, are all encountered in these inscriptions dating from the 3rd century BC to the imperial period. As expected, Serapis and Isis are by far the commonest recipients of the Rhodian population's prayers, often being addressed as saviors. Epigraphic records of Celtic associations can also be considered an accurate indicator on the spread of the various cults on the island. Rhodes, along with Athens and Delos, belongs to an important group of ancient deities where the socio-economic conditions combined with the historical conjectures favored the establishment and flourishing of private associations with members of both genders, different social status, and varied financial capacity to share the common purpose. Names of private associations deriving from divine names are generally believed to indicate their cultic character, although modern research tends to disconnect them from a purely religious orientation. Nevertheless, the members of associations appear to gather periodically at banquets in honor of their patron god and include in their regulation various ritual activities such as libations and sacrifices, music and dance, in order to ensure the protection and safety of their members. The epigraphic material of Rhodes includes 13 inscriptions mentioning associations of Serapiastel, devotees of Serapis, and Isiastel, devotees of Isis. 3 of them refer to an association of Serapiastel families, 5 to associations of Lindos, and the rest of them to associations of Rhodes. Mentions on associations of Serapis devotees generally outnumber those of Isis. The Isiastes stand out mainly in Rhodes, while in Lindos, the names of both gods are combined to form the name of an association active in the early 1st century AD. Unfortunately, most inscriptions commemorate the awarding of honors to benefactors without offering any hints for their administration, regulations, and activities, or the officials and their members, as it happens in many other cases with regard to the rich epigraphic evidence of Rhodian associations. Of exceptional significance for comprehending the diffusion of Isiac cults on the island in terms of time and space are the inscriptions providing information on the priests of the Egyptian gods in Rhodes. A public office related to the cult of Serapis is attested shortly after the middle of the 3rd century BC in Camiros, and Lindos a little later, circa 200. In Lindos, in Camiros and Lindos, and a little later, circa 215 BC in Rhodes. The Rhodian officials who served the Egyptian gods received the typical title Hierer Serapios. However, there are 4 exceptions of this rule. Twice the name of Serapis is accompanied by the name of Isis, and twice the priestly title is being modified as Hierer Isios without any mention of Serapis. All exceptions are encountered in inscriptions concerning the Rhodian Aztec, a fact that differentiates the capital city from Camiros and Lindos, where the cult of Serapis seems to prevail in the Hellenistic period. In addition, considering that the name of Isis appears in epigraphic records of priests and associations several years later than the name of her divine companion, it can be reasonably argued that Serapis' cult was the first to be introduced in Rhodes, while the cult of the goddess gained wider acceptance mainly from the 1st century BC and on. In Camiros, the priesthood of Serapis is documented in 13 lists of Camiran officials dated from 249 BC to the mid-2nd century BC, in contrast to Lindos, where the relevant inscriptions are available in greater numbers. About 30 inscriptions recovered mainly in the sanctuary of Athena in Thea list the names of many priests appointed to serve Serapis from 242 BC until 160 AD in the Libyan Serapeum. In Rhodes, the corresponding material is limited to 8 inscriptions and dated from 215 BC to the 2nd century AD. The epigraphic evidence proves crucial for tracing and verifying the establishment of the Egyptian cults in Rhodes, their development through time, their duration, and importance for public life. In Camiros, for example, the relevant inscriptions cover only 1 century. What happens in later years remains an open case. Notwithstanding that the priest of Serapis is steadily included in the catalogs of the city's priests from mid-3rd to the mid-2nd century BC, he almost always appears at the bottom of the list entries. This implies that despite the incorporation of Egyptian deities into public religious life in Camiros, the foreign cult of Serapis never overshadowed the cults of Greek gods and other local deities and heroes. In Lindos, on the other hand, where the priesthood of Serapis has been attested during 4 consecutive centuries, the priest of the Egyptian god usually occupies the 3rd place in the list of public officers, just after the Libyan magistrate, priest of Athena Libyan and Zeus Polyeus, and the priest of Apollo Pythios. This fact reflects the high rank of the office to which eminent citizens of Lindos were usually appointed. At last, the city of Rhodes, as the administrative and financial center of the island, presents distinct differences from Lindos and Camiros. Here, the title of the priest of the Egyptian gods is encountered in varied forms, in which the name of Isis sometimes appears, but not necessarily together with that of Serapis. Moreover, although the priesthood of Serapis is annual, a Greek standard applied to all public and religious offices, there is a single testimony for a person, Titus Flavius Thrasylochus, to whom the title of long-time priest of Isis and Serapis and Toasi, which means the city in the city of Rhodes, is ascribed, among other lifelong priesthoods. Finally, the presence of religious practitioners of Egyptian origin is attested in the city, a fact which sets the conditions of declaring the sanctuary of Isis in Rhodes as a model center for the worship of the Egyptian gods and one of the most important in the Aegean area, as will be shown below. Decisive momentum in gaining an insight on the character developed by the Egyptian cults while adapting to the social and religious environment of the Rhodian society was the evaluation of the archaeological evidence recovered just recently from the sanctuary of Isis in the ancient city of Rhodes. The Ision is situated on the coastline of the lower easternmost part of the city, between two of its 5 ancient harbors and next to the Hellenistic fortification. The Temple of Isis, facing towards the south, was erected in the middle of the northern part of the shrine enclosure in the first quarter of the 3rd century BC, a date provided mainly by a deposit of Rhodian camphor. About 4 meters to the south of the temple, almost aligned with its western flank, lays a subterranean crypt consisting of a narrow stairway of 11 preserved steps covered with a sloping roof which runs from south to north and leads to a well. Facilities as this one, which involve a stairway leading to a source of water, are known as Nile water crypts and were constructed specifically for creating appropriate housing for the holy water of the Nile, the central element in the cult of the Egyptian gods. A significant feature in the structural design of the Rhodian crypt is the absence of a direct connection of the staircase to the well, in addition to the fact that the south part of the well has been purposefully dismantled in order to facilitate the common function of 2 initially separate structures. These factors apparently attest to the pre-existence of the well in the area, eventually adapted to serve along with the stairway and each of the cult rituals. The religious character of the excavated buildings was explicitly confirmed by a group of sculptures in both Greek and Egyptian style, discarded inside the crypt after the cultic activities of the sanctuary had ceased. Among them, the Hellenized forms of Isis and Serapis appear together, with Horus in the form of a falcon and possibly Apis, the sacred bull of Memphis. A votive plaque with the dedication to Osiris, recovered from the wall foundation fence of the sanctuary enclosure, also bears witness of the concurrent piety demonstration towards Serapis' Egyptian counterpart. The group of statuary is supplemented by 2 male striding figures, an amorphous block statue, and fragmentary falcons in Egyptian style, 2 almost identical sphinxes on white marble, and several other fragments of Egyptian and Greek-style sculptures. This blending of Egyptian and Greek elements, evident not only in the sculptures that once adorned the sanctuary, but in its architectural plan as well, which was enriched by an Egyptian-like facility such as the Nile water crypt, shape its peculiar character, which finds no parallels in the contemporary sanctuaries of the Egyptian gods in the Greco-Roman world. The material evidence gathered from the excavation, albeit limited, proved indicative in reconstructing major aspects concerning the large planning, the decoration, and the dating of the sanctuary, while the nearly total absence of the graphic material does not allow any comprehension of its function in different levels. And another fact, the lack of inscriptions combined with certain evidence offered by the excavation raises new questions about the modus operandi of the early period of the Ision, the identity of the worshipped deities, the priestly personnel who served them, and to whom exactly the sanctuary was addressed. As supplementary sources for discussing the issues above, we have to turn to the testimony not only of the authors of the Rhodian inscriptions, but of ancient writers as well. Having dated with certainty the construction of the temple in the first 3 decades of the 3rd century BC, it's surprising that the earliest mention of the priest of Serapis in the city of Rhodes dates at least 50 years later. Such a relatively large gap can only be partially justified by the scarcity of information on the priests of the Egyptian gods in Rhodes, in contrast to the numerous relevant inscriptions of Camillus and Linnus. Nevertheless, it is difficult to imagine the circumstances under which the older cities of the island could have adopted a new foreign cult almost simultaneously and before its official establishment in the administrative center of the state. Curiously enough, this inconsistency is further highlighted by the fact that the Nile water crypt of the Ision seems to have been omitted from the initial land planning of the precinct, as it is suggested by the fact that its staircase consists a later addition to a pre-existing well. mind that the archaeological finds from the Rhodian sanctuary point unquestionably to the worship of the Egyptian gods, and yet architectural evidence and ethnographic sources lead to ambiguous conclusions concerning its early period of function, a reasonable explanation can be sought through an alternative approach in the evaluation of the available data. While examining the issue from a historical point of view, one easily comes to the conclusion that in the early years of the 3rd century BC, just after the successful attempt of Demetrius to occupy Rhodes in 304 BC, the new cult which insinuated itself into the group of the official cults of the Rhodian city-state was that of Ptolemy I. Theodorus of Sicily clearly mentions that the citizens of Rhodes, complying with the oracle of Libyan Zeus Ammon, proceeded to Ptolemy's deification and dedicated the tenements to him as a reciprocal act for his active support during the siege of Demetrius, of the city by Demetrius. The historical fact consorts well with the construction date of the temple, and it is not an exaggeration to consider that the Rhodian sanctuary was initially dedicated to the cult of Ptolemy I. As a reasonable development, it can be assumed that the cult of Sarapis, patron deity of the Ptolemies, and his consort Isis must have been added a little later, following the wish of the Rhodians to strengthen the friendly economic ties between the two states. In this way, both the early dating of the temple and the posterior addition of the Greek would be sufficiently explained. What needed to be examined, though, are how and when the cult of the Ptolemies was relocated from the sanctuary known at a later date as Sion to the so-called Ptolemaion, the second gymnasium of Rhodes. The plan of the Ptolemaion gymnasium fits accurately to the Theodorus description of the tenements dedicated to Ptolemy I by the Rhodians. Its remains have been located in another part of the ancient city to the west of the Sion, but not far from it. Although the narrative of Theodorus leaves no doubt that during his era the impressive gymnasium was consolidated to the collective memory as the only place where the cult of the Ptolemies was practiced, practically does not elucidate on whether there was a predecessor of it. As a matter of fact, while the excavation results in different parts of the monumental complex of the gymnasium point to a general dating in the 2nd century BC, as well as its continuous use throughout the Roman period, the proposed dating for its erection in the late 4th century BC relies only on scant stratigraphic data. Hence, it cannot be excluded that the Ptolemaion gymnasium was constructed later, most probably just after the destructive earthquake of 228 BC, when the Hellenistic kings, including Ptolemy III, contributed financially to the restoration of Rhodes. Inscriptions also testify that architects and builders traveled from Egypt in order to help with the reconstruction of the city, and perhaps they should be credited the monumentality of the gymnasium complex, evident in Alexandrian architecture as well. If this assumption is accurate, it is reasonable to think that once the construction of the new gymnasium was completed, its affinity to the Ptolemaic Evangelicism motivated the Rhodians to relocate the dynastic cult from the Sion to a place that seemed more appropriate at that particular moment. Thus, the cult of the Ptolemies was separated from the cult of the Egyptian gods, and the latter remained unmingled thereafter in the earlier sanctuary. Consequently, the modified cultic background created the need of constructive adjustments to the spatial planning of the tenements. The renovation that followed aimed to fulfill the requirements of a sanctuary dedicated to Sarapis and Isis. Therefore, it was deemed necessary to build a proper underground crypt for the Isaac rituals, the lack of which until then would have been covered either by the pre-existent well itself or by any other receptacle for the sacred Nile water. Nevertheless, the alterations must have been completed until 215 BC, when the name of Sarapis priest debuted in the catalog listing the priests of the official council of the city, marking the beginning of a new era for the sanctuary. Speaking of the city officials appointed to serve the Egyptian gods in the sanctuary of Isis in Rhodes, priority has to be given in explaining their absence from inscriptions dating before 215 BC. On one hand, this results from the fact that the available evidence from Rhodes is totally circumstantial because few catalogs of the city's religious officers survive. On the other hand, all the names of two priests of the Ptolemies appear in the priestly catalogue of Rhodes dated shortly after 221 BC. The name of the priest of Sarapis is not cited. This serious omission cannot be overlooked, since it could only mean either that the priestly office for the sanctuary of the Egyptian gods did not exist at that specific time, or that its holder was not a Rhodian citizen. The key to the riddle lies perhaps in the original coexistence and privacy of the Ptolemaic ruler cult over the cults of the Egyptian gods in the city sanctuary. Hence, during its early period, the chief officer of the sanctuary must have been a priest of the Ptolemies, and the person charged with the duty of conducting the Asiatic rituals must have been a foreigner. Otherwise, his name would appear in the catalogue of the Rhodian priests dated in 221 BC. Despite that Rhodes lacks relevant archaeological evidence for this specific period, it is not hard to imagine the presence of Egyptians in the Rhodian sanctuary in the mid-3rd century BC at the latest, in order to expedite the establishment of the new cult. After all, the cases of the Egyptian priests Apollonius from Memphis in Delos and Mafris from Busiris in Thessalian Dimitrias can easily stand out as concurrent examples in the Greek world. Such a possibility would be suggested as perfect justification to explain the absence of mentions of Greek priests of the Egyptian cults in the city of Rhodes before 215 BC, when the earliest reference to a priest of Sarapis occurs. Yet, the presence of Egyptian priests in Rhodes is actually attested at a later date by the epitaph of Herimon from Memphis found in the Rhodian necropolis. The name of the deceased appears without a patronymic, followed by his nationality and priestly status. He is called Hiereps Isios, that means priest of Isis. Herimon of Memphis was one of the numerous foreigners, many of them Egyptians, who had left their place of origin settling down in Rhodes. He must have spent the last years of his life in the city and passed away, obviously known by the title inscribed on the stele which marked his grave. Notwithstanding that the Greek epitaph gives poor information of the Egyptian priest's personal details, it is enlightening about a determinative feature of his office. The use of the noun hiereps for Herimon instead of the past participle hieratepsas, a common formula for those who previously held a priestly office, revealed that his tenure was not limited in time, following the Greek standard for priesthood, but he was appointed to this position for life. One question seeks for an answer at all. Did he serve as a priest of Isis in the city sanctuary or in a private cultic space? Regardless of the answer to the previous question, the case of Herimon from Memphis demonstrates undeniably that Egyptian priests of Sarapis and Isis were actually present in Rhodes, perhaps in the Rhodian sanctuary itself. It is not absurd to think that the Egyptians must have been incorporated in the priestly staff of the sanctuary soon after its foundation as specialists in Egyptian rites, and even if their competence was gradually attenuated after the establishment of the Greek corresponding priestly office, they were never totally supplanted by their Rhodian homologues, probably because of their deep knowledge of the sophisticated Egyptian ritual. The presumable presence of Egyptian priests in the sanctuary of Isis, stemming from the epitaph of Herimon from Memphis, is just one of the factors insinuating the influence of Egypt on the organization and operation of the sanctuary. The most telling evidence can be sought in its space arrangement and decorative settings, indicative of a serious effort to present an authentic Egyptian experience to the public. The adoption of Egyptian architectural features and the construction of the water grid, which imitates the form of Egyptian nilometers, the use of heraldic sphinxes, most probably flanking a doorway or a traditional Egyptian dromos, and the remarkable number of Egyptian and Egyptianizing statuary, obviously offerings of pious worshippers, not only reflect the great impact of Egyptian culture, but also offer some clues as to the identity of those visiting the sanctuary, the majority of whom would have been foreign residents of Rhodes, maritime travelers, and merchants. The Egyptian style cultures from the Isior fall into a category of artifacts to which the term Pharaonica can be applied. This term was recently adopted by Michel Malaise in an attempt to distinguish between the Egyptian geometric and archaic periods and the Egyptian and Egyptianizing works of art found in public and private sanctuaries of the Egyptian gods outside of Egypt. The Pharaonica of Rhodes can be considered as an exceptional characteristic of the city sanctuary because they represent the precursor of those appearing in the Roman, Lycia, and Serapean of the Western Mediterranean. More than one of theories have been engaged by the scholars in order to interpret the presence and use of Pharaonica in the sanctuaries of the Egyptian gods without having reached a consensus yet. Some have supported their mere aesthetic function, aiming at the creation of an exotic scenery. Others have believed in their religious character and an essential role in the comprehension of the hidden symbolism in the ritual practice. Given the fact that none of the theories can be totally rejected, it would be more realistic to state that no one is able to assure that reported Egyptian or Egyptianizing objects maintain their original symbolism as long as their continuous exposure in a differentiated cultural environment would inevitably cause their semantic mutation. In spite of everything, it is not unlikely to think that not only personal beliefs and experience of the pilgrims should be the central axis of the interpretive approach of Pharaonica, but their effect on them, either direct, or indirect, could be equally diversified as well. In this respect, the Rhodian Pharaonica can be interpreted as a serious means in exploring aspects of the city sanctuary which otherwise would have remained obscure. The Egyptian sculptures could serve as a material testimony for the visitors of the sanctuary, exposing their beliefs. It is clear enough that they meant to be offerings to the gods of Egypt by those who venerated them in their authentic Egyptian form. This fact leads to the speculation of ascribing a foreign identity to the majority of those who dedicated such sculptures, as it is natural to think that their choices would have been defined by their cultural and religious background. The coexistence of Greek sculptures only affirms the wide range of the devotees who wish to honor the Egyptian gods in the sanctuary of Rhodes. Had the first been gifts to the gods by devotees of non-Greek origin, the latter must have been offerings of Greeks, whether Rhodian citizens or not. Nonetheless, the significance of the Egyptian-style statue from the Rhodian Museum should not be confined to their religious and social interpretation. The question of whether they were imported or locally manufactured is still to be examined since no stone analysis have been conducted. It should be noted, though, that even if they were not imported from Egypt, their strict adherence to the rules of the Egyptian art indicate that they were created either by Egyptian artists settled in Rhodes or by sculptors of other ethnicities trained in the techniques of Egyptian art, as it occurred later in the Italian peninsula. Despite the absence of archaeological proof of the existence of Egyptian art workshops on the island, the multi-ethnic population of cosmopolitan Rhodes favors such a possibility, along with the fact that the Pharaonica found in the sanctuary are only a part of the group of Egyptian and Egyptianizing sculptures found elsewhere in the city. Furthermore, no one can overlook the demand for votive offerings by those who wish to venerate the Egyptian deities in Rhodes, and it is not far-fetched to think that an Egyptian art workshop was active nearby in order to satisfy this demand. Closing the discussion about the Rhodian Pharaonica, a brief comment has to be made on the male striding figures, regardless of the fact that they cannot be directly related to a specific deity. Their function as exclusively decorative objects seems to be an unsatisfactory interpretation. Some of them, like the statue of Dionysius of Iassos, or the now fallen block statue, depict common devotees. But others are reminiscent of Ptolemaic royal portraits. Taking into consideration that similar statues are uncommon in the Aegean sanctuaries of the Egyptian gods during the Hellenistic period, the practice of the Ptolemaic ruler cult, along with the cults of the Egyptian gods in the early period of the sanctuary, arises once more as a reasonable assumption. It is true that more steps have to be taken in order to turn the assumptions into historic reality, and perhaps this is a task almost impossible to accomplish. Yet one has to admit that the sanctuary of Isis in Rhodes, due to its placement next to the harbors of one of the greatest Hellenistic commercial centers of the Eastern Mediterranean, was a decisive stepping stone for the journey of the Egyptian gods from Egypt to other parts of the ancient world, expediting the spread of their cult. However, despite its unique features and unquestionable appeal to a wide range of pilgrims of Greek and non-Greek origin, its impact on the Rhodian citizens is hard to be traced. Under the light of the indirect testimony of the theophoric names appearing in inscriptions from the island, only 10% of the people bearing names which derived from the Egyptian deities were actually citizens of Rhodes. On the other hand, it is not surprising that the majority of the foreigners named after Serapis, Isis, and Ammon come from Asia Minor, a region where the Hellenized Egyptian cult was widely diffused, as well as Egypt and Libya, homeland of the divinities under discussion. The low percentage of the Rhodians bearing Isiac theophoric names demonstrates either the Rhodians' reluctance to renew their old family names or their lack of enthusiasm towards a new religion. Thus, it is possible that because of the continuous effort of the conservative Rhodian society to keep its identity unaffected by the effects of its multicultural environment, the cult of the Egyptian gods, although an official state cult, flourished mainly among the foreigners of the city, the medics and the slaves. These groups of Rhodian population, devoid of the political rights and benefits stemming from the Rhodian citizenship and struggling for a better life, were susceptible to the new religion represented by the Hellenized gods of Egypt, the divine power of whom remained at the disposal of common and unfortunate people and believed widely spread in the Hellenistic period and later on. Thank you for your attention.